Hello, everyone, and welcome to our call this evening. This is a call for the National Infrastructure Bank, and we're calling it "The Devil is in the Details." And that's really an important concept to think about. And what we hope to do today is present to you many of the details and background information on the National Infrastructure Bank. So we have a very interesting and educated lineup of speakers for you this evening. And we would like to just move right on forward into the call. So my name is Julie Olsen. I will be the moderator for the call this evening. I'm a small business owner out of the Pacific Northwest and have been very active in the Democratic Party in Alaska, former member of the executive committee and current chair of the Progressive Caucus here in Alaska. And we'll be going through our list of speakers, and then at the end we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. And so looking forward to being able to help everyone get a better understanding of the National Infrastructure Bank. So we have with us today Alphecca Muttardy, a macro-economist formerly with the International Monetary Fund. So she'll be doing a general overview presentation of the National Infrastructure Bank. From there, we'll move on to Dr. Stephen Hubbard, a PhD, who will be talking about in more detail the need for a national infrastructure bank of the size that we're talking about. And then from there, we'll move on to hear a few words from a variety of the supporters we have around the country for the National Infrastructure Bank. So I think with that, we will turn the meeting over to Alphecca.
Thank you very much, everyone, and good evening. And for those of you on the West Coast too, thank you for joining us. My name is Alphecca Muttardy. I'm going to since our theme this evening is the devil in the details, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the current bills that are in Congress to finance infrastructure through the budget, and how then, importantly, this National Infrastructure Bank proposal differs from those projects. So we're here to talk to you about HR 3339, which is the proposal for a National Infrastructure Bank. And I'll begin first by starting to explain to you what is entailed in this, what is the status of this infrastructure financing through the budget. Currently, there are two main sets of bills to finance infrastructure. The first is a Senate bipartisan bill for $550 billion of new money over the next 5 years. It was passed by the Senate, approved by the Senate on August 10, and it now goes down to the House to wait for agreement on the second bill, the reconciliation plan. The reason for this is that progressives in the House have said they will not vote for the reconciliation package unless they make sure that they will not vote for the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill, until they make sure that all that they wanted to get passed through the reconciliation package is passed at the same time and brought to the president's desk. Now, for that bipartisan bill, as I said, it provides only $550 billion of new money over the next 5 years. I'm going to go over some of the details that are in this package for new money. Then the second package is a $3.5 trillion reconciliation package. And by that, they mean a package that can be passed only with Democratic support, so that it will need all 50 votes of senators in the Senate and then a majority in the House in order to get passed. This reconciliation package rolls together 4 different things. First is the 2022 fiscal year budget, which is the appropriations for running the government for fiscal year 2022. And then it also rolls in the 5-year reauthorization bills for transportation and water infrastructure. And by reauthorization, this means the normal baseline spending that the budget normally passes for these two categories. And then of the transportation part, this is essentially the Representative DeFazio's bill of $575 billion of baseline money over 5 years for infrastructure projects, mostly transportation, and then a little bit more money for water. So that's the baseline spending. In addition, it also rolls together the $1.8 trillion American Families Plan. This was one of the big proposals that President Biden came up with when he came into his administration. And then fourthly, it extends the debt limit on the debt for the next 10 years. Now, within this package, there is no new money for high-speed rail, although Representative DeFazio has said he might try to find some high-speed rail money in this $575 billion baseline spending. And then also it does not have any financing or appropriations for Seth Moulton's high-speed rail bill of $250 billion. So both in this package and this package, we're leaving out significant amounts of money for high-speed rail. And then finally, this framework for this $3.5 trillion package came out of Senator Sanders' budget committee. He was the one that formulated this package and then laid out the framework for our spending for the next 10-year period. Next, it must go to Senator Wyden's Finance Committee, and that has on it some Democrats who might oppose the package. But of course, since the main chair of the committee is a Democrat, and there are enough Democrats on there, it will be up to the centrist Democrats on the committee to actually agree to this plan, come up with pay-fors, and then make it into an actual bill with all of the lines of spending that will be laid out. It's important to note, however, I point out that I did look at the whole the Sanders committee framework for the next 10 years, and it does raise the federal debt by another 50%, from 30 trillion to 45 trillion, and that will really increase our interest payments on this federal debt over time. But even if both of these measures pass, $4.5 trillion and infrastructure financing gap still remains. So let's go to the next slide and talk about some of these particulars. Here is this first column here is the promise of $5 trillion in spending over 10 years that can be provided by a national infrastructure bank. And it is comprised of two parts. The total financing gap that exists for infrastructure that is measured by the American Society of Civil Engineers in 16 different categories. That's $2.6 trillion. And then in addition, some other categories that were added on into this legislation, including affordable housing, high-speed rail, and broadband access, and then large mega projects for water projects. So all of this will be is promised to be funded and financed through this National Infrastructure Bank bill without adding any new deficits or appropriations from the federal budget. And then compare that to this Senate bipartisan plan, which only provides $550 billion. And it is really very much too small to get the job done. This is new money compared to financing gap that we have. And so it's apples to apples, but it's very much too small. It will not provide all that is needed as measured by the engineers for roads and bridges, not enough for transit. Passenger rail only provides some refurbishments for beefing up the Amtrak system, but not adding on any new passenger rail tracks. There's money, of course, a little bit in here for electric vehicles, but even this will not be enough to solve climate change problems. For safety and resiliency of infrastructure, and then really basically way too small an amount for water infrastructure. It promises only $55 trillion in new money for water infrastructure, of which only $15 billion will be to fix the lead line pipes. And the engineers say that we need at least $1.1 trillion for water infrastructure, maybe 60 to 150 billion of that just for lead line pipes. So it falls way short the original promise that was made is that we would replace all of the lead line pipes in the country, and this proposal will really fall short on that. Then the next big category where it's falling short is fixing our electric grid. This is really, really critical. We have to make sure that it is cyber secure. We have to build out new transmission capacity because there's congestion on the transmission lines. We're not even able to bring in new renewable energy projects because of this congestion on the transmission lines, and we need much more investment on the electric grid to make sure that it is truly resilient. Aviation falls short. Inland waters and ports, hazardous waste, it will be is the only item in here that'll probably be enough to cover everything. Then let's go down to these other projects that the engineers don't normally cover. The first of these is high-speed rail. We have put into our plan, we have been the only one to cost out what a full high-speed rail line would cost that is needed to cover all of the United States in a complete grid and cover areas that have high traffic congestion now. That cost is $1.1 trillion, and there's nothing coming out of either the bipartisan plan, maybe a little tiny bit in DeFazio's transportation plan, but we still have to see the fine print of that rollout. So this is the only one that has a plan for fully costing high-speed rail. The next is broadband. We know critically we need to have more broadband in the United States in two areas. In rural areas where there is no broadband currently, and then in intercity areas where there's lots of broadband around in the street, but low-income communities cannot afford it. And this is really having a big impact on poverty coming out of COVID, education. All these things need to be ameliorated by two things: not only having enough financing for broadband, but making sure that we are delivering affordable broadband to those residents that need it. In the bipartisan plan, there are now promises for more broadband. And then finally, water projects. Only a little bit in here for water projects. And we know we have a huge drought problem in the Southwest, even in places along the Pacific Northwest, that we need more money to address broadband. So that's those are the devils in the details. So I'll turn it back over to Julie.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alphecca, for going through that. And we're going to keep moving along as we want to get hear from everybody on the agenda here this evening. So next we have Dr. Stephen Hubbard. He wrote his PhD thesis on infrastructure banks. I think you'll find him very interesting and knowledgeable. He's a former senior GIS analyst for one of the major water districts in Los Angeles. So Dr. Stephen Hubbard, take it away.
So when I was working on my doctoral thesis, which as you just heard was on infrastructure banks, my first question was, well, what size bank do you need? And that means basically what size is the deficit that you're trying to compensate for with the bank? So obviously there's a big difference between a pickup truck and a 400-ton dump truck. So the first thing I did is I went through the ASCE's documents and discovered that no, it's not guesstimates, that their estimate, which now is at $2.6 trillion unfunded need. It's based on only on government documents. And further, there are quite a few things that are left out. And when I talked to them, they said, well, of course, there's lots of stuff that's left out. If you look at our report, it says 16 categories. That's all that's in there. Anything else, and that's not in that $1.6 trillion hole. So when you start going through it, you discover that there's both hard and soft infrastructure that's missing. As Alphecca mentioned, groundwater depletion, the cost of putting the money back that supports, the water that supports 50% of our food production is 10 to 20 times the current cost of just pumping it out of the ground. And so imagine what that'll do to your food bills, the hardened grid, cybersecurities. We've just been sort of taught by China and Russia that they can basically shut down sections of our infrastructure without much effort. So basically, we're going to need somewhere between a 1 to 200 billion and maybe $1 trillion effort, where everything that's connected to the internet, whether it's a chip or a computer system, will have to be tested for weaknesses and backdoor access that was built into it when it was made offshore. EV tolling by 2030, most cars that are produced in the United States will not be gasoline powered. Our motor fuel tax for funding roads is all based on, of course, fuels, not electricity. There currently isn't funding for setting up an automatic nationwide tolling system, re-onshoring, lost manufacturing, deferred maintenance, and financing. And when you throw that in, and still quite a few other things are left out, you discover that the unfunded deficit is actually balloons to somewhere between $4 and $7.5 trillion, with deferred maintenance of $125 to $200 billion a year. So you can think of that's the cost of basically like the interest on a mortgage loan. If you don't pay that minimum amount, you're not keeping up with the accelerated decrepitude. And to basically fill in the hole and keep up with everything, we need $400 to $700 billion a year in real money. So where does this come from? So this is shows deferred maintenance. And so basically this is concrete, this gray line here. This is the area here represents money lost, time and repair costs going up the vertical axis here. So what happens with reinforced concrete is an example. So a freeway that's made out of that. If you don't repair it and you decide you're going to save money, and the amount of money you're saving is this little green area here, after 5 years, you've actually lost 5 times the amount of money that you thought you were saving. 10 years, it balloons to 25, 15 years, 125. And so this is the exponential growth of deferred maintenance, and why underfunding on maintenance is so catastrophic. So this yellow area here shows basically the $4 to $7.5 trillion that we're short over 10 years. Down here is the $525 billion in new money from the Group of 21 bill. If you did it again for another 5 years, so you've now had the same funding for 10 years. This is how much of the total amount is covered. Public-private partnerships are only good for 1% to 2% of the total amount. And so that's area there. As you can see, this is all woefully inadequate. And so finally, this is the cumulative national debt of the industrial democracies here. And down here is the 2 communist nations. And so what this shows is, and this is true for individual nations as well as the cumulative amount, over the last 40 years, there's not a nation, industrial nation in the world that has been able to reduce its national deficit. So whenever someone says, okay, we're just going to use pay-go and pay as you go, and once we get the budget under control, then we'll actually start funding our infrastructure. And remember, for every dollar that you underspend, you're wasting $2 to $4, then we'll basically be in to catch up. But if no nation in the world has been able to do this over the last 40 years, the chances of the United States doing this in the next 10 to 20 or 40 years is also pretty much zero. And so this is why we need the $5 trillion infrastructure bank as a complement to whatever is spent on Congress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hubbard. Appreciate that explanation. There was a report that came out recently that listed the top 10 states in terms of infrastructure needs. So Mississippi was on that list, and but also, maybe surprisingly to some people, New Jersey and New York is up there at the top of the list also. But of course, New York is an old city with a lot of aging infrastructure, and it's at sea level. And of course, any coastal city is going to be in huge need of infrastructure to be able to deal with sea level changes. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Assemblyman Felix Ortiz, who is the former Assistant Speaker of the New York State Assembly. So Assemblyman Ortiz, can you share a few moments?
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing us together one more time to continue to galvanize support about such important issue that really need to be addressed in this budget section. I do not believe that we have to wait. Our people who are been talking to, and they say to me, well, Felix, at least we get you guys getting something. And I say, well, it's not about getting something, it's about getting the right thing in the budget to make sure that we don't have to come back to fight for what is really needed to move our economy forward. First of all, I would like to thank everyone and Stuart, and also I would like to point out that Stuart was the person who got me involved in all this when I was a legislator 3 years ago by me introducing the first resolution around the country. And for some of the legislators that are sitting or listening to this room, my advice is very simple. If you do believe in that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren doesn't need to pay the price for this infrastructure that is happening today in the federal government, then we need you here. We need you here to be the voice in you respective houses and Senate, and also involve the local government and make the local government to be part of a positive action on this issue. Infrastructure, not just about the red roll, which is very important because as we all know, China is competing very heavily economically. And China, I've been to China 56 times plus and in my 26 years career. And I think it's very important that we send the message to our US Senator and Congress that the time is now and it's enough. So thank you. And let's try to continue to build consensus and build organization to support our effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative or former Speaker Ortiz. Next, we're going to move to the other side of the country, New Mexico. New Mexico is suffering from the historic drought conditions that have been affecting most of the West. And Senator William Tallman has been one of our point people there in the New Mexico Senate. Senator Tallman, can you share with us some thoughts about the need for infrastructure in New Mexico?
Very pleased to be part of this program. Became very interested in this in the NID several months ago when I got a call, and I sponsored a resolution in the New Mexico State Senate in support of the NID. You know, for years, America's infrastructure was an envy of the world, but no longer. Most people in the United States agree that we need to make a massive investment in our nation's infrastructure. However, we can't agree, or Congress can't agree on how to pay for it. Fixes have been put off far too long. It's long past the time that we address this problem. U.S. airports and roads and public transportation facilities draw frequent comparison to those in less developed countries. People come back from visiting overseas in the modern industrialized countries, and some of our infrastructure looks like a third world country. I've been to China twice in the last 25 years, and it'll just blow you away with their modern bridges, high-speed trains, airports, and road system. It's just, you really can't fully appreciate it unless you see it firsthand. In New Mexico, we got 30% of our roads are in poor condition, and each driver pays nearly $700 in auto repairs. And the average person, I calculated, is only spending anywhere from $100 to $200 in our gas tax. We have the third lowest gas tax in the United States. As I said before, Europe and Asia have really leaped ahead of us in with their so-called smart cities, high-speed trains, and eco-friendly buildings. And 2 years ago, the United States ranked 13th in the world in a broad measure of infrastructure quality, down from 5th place in 2002, according to the World Economic Forum's Capital Competitive program. So, it has already been mentioned by two previous speakers. Here in the Southwest, we're in a severe drought, and we need to spend billions of dollars throughout the United States in water infrastructure. And as already been pointed out by Mr. Hubbard, he calculating $1.1 billion just for water construction, which is the same amount that of the $1.1 billion infrastructure bill is going through Congress. And we need to spend billions of dollars bringing water to the Southwest from those states that have a surplus of water. There was an article in AP, the Associated Press had an article last week that said that Arizona will have their water reduced by 1/5 starting in early 2022. So we need a lot of money in that area. The beauty of the NID is that it will be capitalized with existing Treasury debt requiring no new federal taxes. Like it or not, we are in a race with China, Europe, and other developed countries. in infrastructure. And then not only is China investing billions of dollars domestically, but they're also building influence among small countries by providing loans and grants for infrastructure projects. So not only are they ahead of us in infrastructure, but they're making loan grants to other countries. Also, the United States is losing the race to be a global economic leader in developing the technologies of the future. In order to be a global economic leader, the United States needs to develop new technologies to provide a more modern system of transportation, education, and communication. NIB is a proven method of financing infrastructure, goes all the way back to George Washington's presidency. I'm a strong supporter, obviously, of NIB. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Senator Tallman. You made some really great points. I would like to point out to everyone that China uses an entity called the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. There's something like 133 nations that are members of that bank, and it makes investments in many of the Asian countries that has led to the offshoring of American manufacturing. And certainly for anybody here that has experienced the global supply chain problems, in other words, when you can't buy a freezer or a stove or get a chip for to buy, or the car manufacturers can't get chips to buy new cars, that is a consequence in part because all of this manufacturing has gone to China. So improving our infrastructure here will allow American manufacturers to be more competitive on a global scale. And of course, that will lead to more good living wage jobs here in the United States. And I would also like to point out that the National Infrastructure Bank, as we have proposed it, has no sunset clause. So this would be an ongoing entity, and it's a long-term solution to a problem that's developing over many years. And so our belief is that it will stop some of the political wrangling every year over passing a bill that includes significant dollars for infrastructure. So with that, I would like to go to another one of our speakers from Pennsylvania, Representative Eddie Day Pashinski, who has been a fighter for living wage jobs in Pennsylvania and has also served on the Commerce Committee there of the in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. So Representative Pashinski.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you very much to Alphecca and of course to Stephen and to all of you that are on this call today, because our future, the future of our children and our grandchildren is at stake. The senator did a great job of bringing the fact about our neighbors. China is taken over. And this infrastructure bank that we're talking about, NIB, National Infrastructure Bank, is a pathway to security and our future. And I want to make sure that people realize that China and many parts of Europe are investing vast sums of money in order to be able to exist and profit and be able to continue on without the need of the United States of America. As stated, our manufacturing has gone to China, and as a result, we have lost a tremendous amount of jobs. The NIB plan that is presented today, that Alphecca presented to you, you're talking about a minimum of 25 million living wage jobs. That in itself maintains our security and our financial stability. I don't believe there's one state in the union where their legislators are not receiving calls about the holes in the road, the bridges that are closed, water that is dirty, undrinkable, and certainly the inability to communicate through the lack of broadband. We found that out with our education system here in Pennsylvania, just like many other states did throughout our nation, whereby our kids couldn't get educated at home because there was no connectivity. Many of our schools themselves didn't have sufficient connectivity. This is primitive. It is time now to invest back in this country. It's for our own good. It's for the security. And the main point that I want to bring out is it is not tax dollars. There are no tax dollars involved here. Roosevelt used it quite successfully to come out of the Great Depression, help us out through World War II. And of course, before that, it was Lincoln who helped bring the country back after the Civil War. This is the time. Now, some people say, hey, we're coming back good. We're coming back strong. Yeah, we are. But our roads are still in terrible condition. Our bridges are in terrible condition. In Pennsylvania, we have 251,000 lane miles. 251,000 lane miles. That's an incredible amount of pavement, of concrete. We have over 25,000 bridges, 4,000 of which have to be replaced. This is causing tremendous traffic jams. If you've ever been on our Schuylkill, you got to plan on an extra half hour, 45 minutes, extra hour, to get to your job because the highways are so jammed. The high-speed rail would eliminate a great deal of that. High-speed rail from New York to Scranton, Pennsylvania to Philadelphia. All of those things would make our country more efficient, safer, and it would present a great future for our children and grandchildren. In Pennsylvania, we do have a resolution that we are presenting in the fall. We've been working with our Republican counterparts, trying to get everybody on board, and we are making progress. So I thank you for the opportunity to welcome all of you here, get you excited about the future of America. We can get this done. We can get it done, but we have to get our representatives and our senators on board. Cut the baloney in Washington, cut the baloney in your state houses and senates. Let's get America back working again for the future of our children and ourselves. How's that? Thank you.
Love it. I think everyone can see why Representative Pashinski has been so successful in his political career. So thank you for that rousing closing there on your remarks.
Julie, thank you. I'm only telling the truth. Thank you.
No, I love it. So, okay, so next we are going to go to another East Coaster, and this would be Mary Jane Shimsky. She's been very active in our group and is the majority leader with the Westchester County, New York Board of Legislators, and she's out of White Plains, New York. Mary Jane?
Thank you very much, Julie. Anyone who has been in elected office for an appreciable amount of time in this country knows that the need for infrastructure funding is vast. Representative Pashinski did a great job. If we just take one issue, for example, climate resiliency, storm resiliency. Obviously, the East and West coasts are going to be hit really hard by sea level rise. And we need to get all of the resiliency work, both to help protect against sea level rise and storms, and to also protect the infrastructure that we have from being harmed. But it's not just the coast. If you have rivers, you are going to have problems, and you are going to need to invest large sums of money in resiliency. Out in Representative Pashinski's area, Wilkes-Barre, large parts of Wilkes-Barre will flood on a semi-regular basis. And this is true in areas all across the country. This has to be done. Everyone's roads in this country are a mess. And if you just sort of price it out, in our area, to fix 4-lane roads, it's going to take a minimum of $1 million a mile. And when you consider the thousands and thousands of miles of road we have in one county, in one state in the Northeast, the need, it clearly is vast. The Hudson River tunnels demonstrate how delicate our transportation infrastructure is. 20% of our GDP flows through those tunnels on a daily basis. Those tunnels should have been fixed years ago, and they weren't. What's going to happen if they go down? The story about that bridge outside of Memphis, Tennessee, which has helped play a role in all of our supply chain problems, could probably give you an idea as to what would happen. We have so much we have to do to fix what we've got. And of course, anyone who is in a city, or a town that has sewer systems, it can cost $1 million to replace a mile of sewer. Think about how many miles of sewers you have in your municipalities, how many municipalities there are in your state, and how old your sewer systems are. And then we go back to the lead in the pipes, broadband. We go into the innovation areas, whether it's stormwater resiliency, energy efficiency, alternative energy, EV charging stations, high-speed rail. We have so much we have to do, and there is not enough money in the appropriations process or in the other infrastructure bank bills that have been bandied about in recent years to come anywhere close to fixing everything that needs to be fixed in this country. That is why this bill is so important. There are more and more members of the House and the Senate who are showing interest in this bill. It's HR 3339, correct? So
Yes. Thank you,
at
Mary
this
Jane.
point, everybody get in touch with your members of Congress, get in touch with your colleagues in your states. We can get this done. The momentum is with us.
Thank you so much, Mary Jane. Appreciate your comments. I would like to address a question in the chat, and this is coming from Maya, who wants to know how the NIB is financed. So there's a couple important things to think about there. First of all, this would be a commercial bank, and it would be capitalized by exchanging preferred stock for already existing treasuries. So that is how we are able to start up this bank without incurring additional US debt. Then these are loans that the bank would be issuing. So loans to projects that ROI. And so let's remember that every municipality, every state out there is already spending money every year to fund infrastructure. However, with the flexible terms and conditions and lower rates that a national infrastructure bank would be able to offer, some of the examples I've looked at, we would be able to finance double the projects or cut the cost of every project in half approximately because of the flexibility and the lower rates that a national infrastructure bank would be able to offer. So again, this is a commercial bank that would be making loans to projects that ROI. So definitely it's not for pie in the sky projects. It's not for projects that, where it's a build it and they will come type of a thing. And we believe that these loans would all be repaid to the federal treasury, and this would end up not costing the taxpayers. So these would be all projects that are justified and paid for by the local entities doing the financing. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Maya. Now let's move on to our next speaker, who is Representative James Roebuck, who is a former representative. I believe he represented West Philadelphia, and he has a master's degree and a PhD and was the chair of the Black Caucus there in the State House. So Representative Roebuck, can you share with us what you're doing there in Philadelphia?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be part of this conversation. We're always doing wonderful things in Philadelphia, but I've really been caught up with this proposal, the infrastructure bank proposal, because I think it speaks very clearly in a number of different ways to re-looking at the way we do business and how we use our resources more effectively. And I think there are a number of things that strike me, and I just want to touch on a few of them. Certainly, we have critical needs for road and highway improvements in states like Pennsylvania. Our system simply doesn't work to the level of one state. We had one of the first turnpike systems in the nation, but that was in the late 1930s, early 1940s. And that's still where we are in many ways in terms of the level of highway construction. And we have problems with needing new bridges, better roads. But I'm also very much a fan of rail. And I've done I like to travel. And one of the things I did when I finished grad school is I took a trip to East Asia because I wrote my a dissertation on U.S. relations with Japan. And when I was in Japan, I rode on a high-speed train, and that was back in at the beginning of the 1970s. That's almost 50 years ago. But that was in Japan at that point, and we in the United States have not yet reached that same level of security. I was in Europe a couple summers ago and rode the Channel, the line from London to Paris, which is a high-speed rail line, and it eliminates the need to get out on a boat to get between France and England. But that again is a kind of advanced thinking about how you adapt rail to make it work well in this century. But I also want to talk a little bit about communications, because that's another issue that affects directly Pennsylvania. And I had a friend, a representative from the northern tier of Pennsylvania, and somehow because of the way we were staying in hotels, I ended up eating breakfast with him on various mornings. And he used to talk about how difficult it was during the election process to get election statistics in his area on the northern tier of Pennsylvania. He had to drive to the southern part of his county to get election returns. I was like, oh, come on, he's just pulling my leg. I'm a Philadelphia guy. He's playing with me. Well, we had a rural education commission in Pennsylvania, ended up in his area. And all I know is one day as I was driving down the highway, first I lost my cell phone, and then I lost my radio. And this is very clearly an issue. And I should have been more familiar with that, because actually my roots are in central Pennsylvania. And I know that part of my family that lived in Chambersburg, they had difficulty with television communications because it wasn't easily accessible. So these are things we can do, but we need the resources to do it. One of the things I find frustrating in this conversation is I pick up the paper every day, people talk about how taxes have to go up, how we have to spend all this money that's going to increase our debt. And no one talks about an infrastructure bank, which is a way to do that without having the negative impact that they seem to suggest is the end result of any major effort to address these issues. So I hope that we can expand the dialogue, change it, so we focus on what we can do without increasing a huge amount of debt, and improve the quality of life for people in Pennsylvania and across the entire nation. So I'm committed to part of this discussion and hopefully building an enthusiasm for it. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Roebuck. Next, we want to go to the other side of the country, and I'd like to bring on Rick Holder, who is the chairman and CEO of Stockmans Bank. Rick has been very instrumental in really addressing some of the practical aspects of the bank and how it would actually operate. And Rick, could you share some thoughts with us on the National Infrastructure Bank?
Sure. I'd like to try to bring a little banking perspective to it. If we're going to call it a bank, then we're going to have to act like a bank, I think. So, you know, some of the issues we deal with at a bank is funding, capital, good underwriting, repayment ability. I mean, all those things for this bank to be successful over a long term, we've got to address all those issues. So I guess you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. One of my ideas, first of all, we have a project that was done back in the 1930s, a WPA project that was a water district that was put in one of our areas our bank's located in, and it's irrigates 50,000 acres that has been the loan has completely been repaid years ago. Still, we reap the benefits of that district, and we have another project on the books and have had for 20 years on another river that would do the same thing. And there just has not been money available to do projects of that kind. My perspective is, and my idea is the way I can see this project to work. I'd like to go back and use an example and a system that has worked well in the past. That's the Farm Credit System or the Federal Home Loan Bank. I mean, Farm Credit System, that was a system set up to help farmers, and they issue government-backed bonds. The farmers, when they get a loan, a percentage of that loan goes into capital into that bank. So you're capitalizing the bank at the same time. You're getting funding. You can match the funding up with the term of the loans. So in the Federal Home Loan Bank, there's 7 districts in the United States set up exactly the same way. It's a bank for banks. Like my bank can go there and borrow money. When I borrow money, a certain percent of that I have to buy stock. So that capitalizes Federal Home Loan Bank. And then I buy it on different terms. As far as I know, there has never been a single bond that has failed in either the Farm Credit System or the Federal Home Loan Bank. It's something we don't have to reinvent. It's already there. And one of the things I come up with is I don't think we have a clue really how many trillions of dollars this bank needs to be. And of course it's going to grow, but the good thing is it needs to be perpetual. It needs to always be there. Our communities are always going to need infrastructure projects. There's a need, and all these communities need new ways of creating jobs, whether it's in my rural area or whether it's we're in the metro in Dallas and Fort Worth with our banks. There's needs there. It's if you do it right and set the bank up right, it's a bank that'll be there forever, and it just keeps getting better. But it's all about basic banking principles of good capital, good loans, good repayment ability, and then underwrite it and service the loans accordingly. So that's the banking perspective I bring to it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Finally, we would like to go to, excuse me, Carolyn Barclift, who is the founder of Build Back Better USA in Olympia, Washington. And Carolyn, can you tell us what you're working on there in the Pacific Northwest?
Goodness, a ton of stuff. So first of all, thank you for having this event. Thank you for asking me to speak at this event. I know very little about banking or about how all of this works, except that I did hold office. I was responsible for a huge budget, and I know that the deferred maintenance or failure to improve facilities costs you many more times what it should in the future, and many more times than what it would cost now to fix it. So what we do at Build Back Better USA is we try to gather as much information and share it out with as many people as possible for the best solutions. And quite honestly, the Infrastructure Bank has allowed for us. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought am I on mute?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. We try to share out that information. And the Infrastructure Bank, what appeals to me about it is I live in an area where we have earthquakes and we have bridges that collapse during earthquakes. They tend to be bridges that we knew all along had problems, and then along comes that little thing, and then suddenly we have to scramble to get it fixed. We live in a state where we have water issues, and our state is on fire. I've never experienced 110 degrees before in my life here, but we've had it now. There's just so much infrastructure that needs to be put into place. And the one thing I can tell you is that we work with a lot of coalitions and networks. And what we try to do is really get to the heart of what it is that people believe that they need. And this is very popular because it's permanent. It doesn't require funding from the federal government on an ongoing basis. It allows us to not only to repair all the things that need to be repaired, but also it provides for us to improve and to advance. That's one of the things that's frustrating about infrastructure, is that we tend to fund particular projects, we build them out, and then we just stop. And we don't provide the funding that's necessary to keep them going. In any event, I can tell you that people are very excited about this, and I'm trying to get them even more excited to advance the project. But you know, my grandfather traveled the whole country working on major infrastructure projects, and so I see the value in providing for good wages to raise families. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Appreciate it. We've had a couple comments here in the chat asking about assurances for Black and Latino farmers. And I think what I'd like to do is go to Dennis Montoya, who I know is on the line. He is the immediate past director of LULAC, which is the League of United Latin American Citizens. He lives in New Mexico. Dennis, could you address the question of ensuring that Latino and Black farmers and communities would be able to benefit from the NIB?
Sure, thank you. I am the immediate past state director of New Mexico LULAC. LULAC is a national organization, and I've not yet had the honor of serving as director of the national. Might happen someday. I am involved because my background is rural and agricultural, and because the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank has a commitment to the development of rural America. I think that developing rural America is going to address many of the issues of my home territory, which is the northern part of New Mexico. Representative Patty Lundstrom is on this call, and Patty Lundstrom represents the area of Gallup, New Mexico, and she has a great portion of the Navajo Nation among her constituents. Pablo Vigil, Dr. Pablo Vigil is on this call, and he is also from the area of northern New Mexico. I think the simple answer to the question of how are we going to assure fair and equitable treatment for minority farmers is the representation that we're starting to see on these coalition meetings and the interest that we're starting to see in our constituent communities. I think that fairness needs to be built in from the ground up. We know that did not always happen in New Deal programs, and I'm a big fan of the New Deal. My dad worked for the Civilian Conservation Corps. I think programs, the employment and infrastructure programs that came in with the New Deal were an injection of economic lifeblood to the state of New Mexico. So I don't have a full answer to the question, how do we ensure fair and equitable treatment? But I think we're starting to see the emergence of an answer just by having us represented in these meetings.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Appreciate that. Okay, I would like to go to Jack Hanna, who is from Oregon. Jack, could you give us your thoughts on the need for infrastructure in Oregon?
Thanks very much, Julie. And really, I want to be a little more expansive than just Oregon. Comments have been made earlier about the anti-government rhetoric that exists, and also Wall Street's influence with regard to government policy. And I want to respond by saying this. Government can succeed and can work. It did in the 1930s under FDR and dug our way out of the Depression and prepared ourselves for World War II. Our government also worked when we passed the Highway Act of 1956, the largest infrastructure program in the country's history, which connected the country to each other as far as automobiles are concerned. We were successful as far as the space program is concerned. And the investment that we made generated $14 for each one that was invested. So government can work, investing in our infrastructure can work. We just need to have the political will. And we don't have it right now. You witness what's in the bipartisan Senate legislation and the reconciliation plan. We're still short $2.5 trillion at least. How are we going to prevent this, our ignoring our infrastructure development? It's going to take political will and political organizing. That's why we're having this webinar tonight, and what we need to do in the future is to organize and build from the ground up in order to force Wall Street and to force Congress, or convince them, rather, is perhaps the better word, that we are on the right track. And this approach, as far as economic development is concerned, regarding infrastructure, has worked 4 times in the past, and it's been successful. The plans that are being bandied about now don't include money for housing, don't include money for new sources of water funding, and high-speed rail, development of our schools, and for training for our workforce. Insufficient funding for lead in our water pipes, broadband, and the electric grid. We have the solution, and we have the devil's details straightened out as far as this legislation is concerned, that has enforcement provisions, has funding that does not go into deficit financing, and does it in a way that provides guidance and direction for our future as far as economic development and competition with our competitors in China and the European Economic Community. We have the answer. We need to convince the public, which we are doing and getting more and more support each and every day. That's why we need to continue this argument and solicit support in order to convince our elected officials that this is the route to go. Thank you so much, Julie, and everyone else.
Thank you, Jack. I do want to say that we've been doing multiple presentations. I'd like to thank the members of the coalition who've been making their time available to get on these Zoom calls. And if you're in a state that hasn't been mentioned and would like to get involved, or in a state that has been mentioned, please contact our group. We can have the organizers put up our email address and contact information in the chat so that you can contact us and find out how you can get involved in this push towards establishing a national infrastructure bank. Let's see, a couple other items. We recently paid for an advertisement in one of the major newspapers in New Mexico. And so we've really been exploring a lot of avenues in terms of getting more attention to the infrastructure bank. I know just this week there was a conference call with members of Senator Patty Murray's staff in Washington, but we've been on calls with senators from Utah, California, New Jersey, New York, just many phone calls. I'm sure Alphecca could give her presentation in her sleep by this point. And so anyway, thanks to all the members of the National Infrastructure Bank Coalition. And thanks for putting up the slide. I'd like to thank everybody again. Please visit our website and help us make this argument with your local legislators, and let's get a national infrastructure bank created and start providing those benefits across the country. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Julie.
Good night, and
Thanks,
thank you.
Alphecca.